Well, on behalf of Ukrainians in Norway, the University of Oslo, Foreningen Middelalder Oslo, and Gamlebyen Historielag, welcome. History is alive. It tells us about our present as well as our past. It stretches out to us. And it's, whether we like it or not, dislike it because of political reasons or private reasons, history is always with us. And sometimes history is news. When we go to the sources, sometimes history becomes news. And we're going to the sources tonight. Oops. We are going to have 3 speakers dealing with different aspects of present and past. We shall start with Ingegerd in Sweden, continue with Ingegerd in Kyiv, and end up with her daughter, Ellisiv, Queen of Norway. We have 3 speakers tonight. Ted Hesselbom, director of the Sigtuna Museum, presenting Ingegerd in Sweden from a Sigtuna perspective. That's where this all started. Akim Galimov, a Ukrainian TV producer with Ukrainian history as a speciality, presenting Ingegerd in Kyiv, a stolen queen from Kyiv's tomb, modern technologies in history telling. And then Gunnar Jørgensen from the University of Oslo will give a portrait of Ingegerd and her daughter, Ellisiv, Queen of Norway, as they are presented in the sagas. And then Tore Skeie, author and historian, will be the moderator of a panel discussion afterwards. And I ask you to please be patient, because we want questions and comments to the panel and not to the speakers directly. And then, Ted Hesselbom, please take the floor.
Thank you.
You want to speak from here?
Yeah, I think I have to stay there. Or you want to stay? Are you changing images, or I'm changing the images? Yeah. Yes, good. Then I have to have glasses. Thank you for inviting me to this opportunity to talk about Ingegerd Olofsdotter. She's very important for the city in Sweden what I'm representing, Sigtuna, and we think that maybe she was there part of her life when she was young, and I'm going to talk about what maybe that could have been and how it could have been. And I also got to talk about how Ingegerd is important for us in our way of writing this history of Sweden. And also in that want to say that we try to see larger of the story and not just talking about one nationalistic issue, because we know that people was moving a lot by themselves or by becoming slaves. They were changing countries and they was growing up somewhere else. So I think we're all very mixed. But of course, there is something special that Sweden and Ukraine has the same colors in our flags. I don't know why. No one has told me yet how it's supposed to be like that. But let's see what's happening. I can't tell you what it is, but I'm just think it's something fantastic. And the first time I saw the flag was in the Eurovision Song Contest. So you understand that the Ukrainian history was not something I learned in school in Sweden. Ingegerd in Sigtuna perspective, and of course it's because of the city and it's because of the connection with her, and of course with her father, who is quite important for the story of Sigtuna. But first I want to say something about myself. This is a book I write together with Anna Lihammar, who is a doctor in archaeology. And there we're going through how the image of the Viking was produced in the beginning of 1800s in Sweden, how we see it has become. So this is the image of the Viking that sometimes is like a filter that we have to go through to see the real Viking history and what happened then. And the next book, Vikingatider, they are both in Swedish, so that's why I haven't translated. Now, when the world was opening, they are trying to see on this period we call the Viking era what happened if you take away the filter of the Viking created long time later. But start with Olof Skötkonung. This is the most important house in Sweden, the State House in Stockholm. And in the top, you have the 3 crowns that always is a strong symbol of Sweden. And this is built in like exactly 100 years ago, 1923. And it's like a very romantic historical building. This is a huge romanticism of some kind of medieval story and fairy tales. And it looks very much like the Hollywood production of the same age. And there is 2 representations of Olav, one on the facade as a sculpture, the first king of 4 that is on this story. So 1923, they thought Olav was the first. And it's sort of, maybe now his father is mentioned also, Erik Segersäll. But probably he's just a creation that we needed to put something before Olav. I don't know. And here is Olav again in this house in one of the most important saal, the Golden Hall. And I want to start there to just say that Olav is quite important in the Swedish history, in the way of trying to explain the Swedish history. And of course, his daughter is very important in that. But for a long time, she has been mostly known by people active in the Christian church. And since 2000s, we don't have a state church. Before that, it was the Protestant church that was dominating. And now after that, we have been mixed up with other Christianity. So we also have the saints in Sweden nowadays. And of course, Ingegerd has become one of the most important because she came from the Orthodox Church of East. Should I say, normally I should say the Russian Orthodox, but I don't know if that's the correct word to say anymore. But I don't know if I can say Ukrainian Orthodox Church. But anyway, she's come from there, and now she is a quite important part of our religious activity in Sweden. There is also like a pilgrim tour on her name between Stockholm and Uppsala, who is the 2 historically important cities in Sweden, and it's passing by Sigtuna. And I'm going this tour every year on the day, we have a day in October or something, when we celebrate Ingegerd. And this is the symbol of her pilgrim tour. And, well, just to say that Ingegerd is used in a lot of different kind of tourist and cultural issues in Sweden today. The photos I'm going to show you now is from a modern fashion photographer called Elizabeth Toll, and we asked her to interpret the life of Ingegerd once. And those different images is made in a movie that they move into each other from when she was born until she was the very important person on an international level. And I'm going to go through now some kind of the issues that I think could be important. And then I go back to Sigtuna and where she is there. But we called about Ingegerd as the Viking. And to use the word Viking in Sigtuna is sort of forbidden because we should say early medieval. And we used to say that Sigtuna is where the Viking age ended. And Ingegerd is there probably then. And if we see what she has been done and what she has been, this importance she has, she's probably the most influent Viking of Scandinavia. And of course, today in a museum, we are very proud to find a woman that could be more important than all the men we already have in our story. She was the Grand Duchess she's in Novgorod and she's in Kyiv, and together with Yaroslav and what's happening there, but other ones is going to talk more about that. And of course that she became a saint. In Sweden we have the Holy Birgitta, who is the the saint that we have in our traditions. And I mean, not before I was started working in Sigtuna 10 years ago. Before that, I didn't even know that there was another saint, Swedish saint, that calls Ingegerd. So Birgitta was considered the only one and the first one in Sweden before. But we also talk about Ingegerd as a diplomat and politicians. And I'm going to go back to this in the story, but if we see her as an important person in a paradigm between what's happening before Christianity and after Christianity became. Sigtuna is a very important city of this. There is a lot of big churches from 1000 to 11th to 12th century, and that's probably where she was part of her life. And it's built by her father. We could be quite sure that he and maybe Erik Egersel has been involved. So it's like the modern city of capital of Brasilia, like Brazil. It's built just from the beginning, and whatever was there before has been taken away. And we know that because there is a mass grave, for example, from this period that probably was the people who didn't accept the new rules and the new Christianity and the new laws. But what also is important, and if you compare what the stories that comes later about Ingegerd is made with a Christian base or a Christian ideology in it, and maybe the time before we want to see that she was much powerful than maybe she was described out of an unchristian world, where we think that class was maybe more important than sex. That she's the son of, are you the son or a daughter of the powerful king or the person in power? You have the possibility to take power yourself. And it wasn't not so normal. If you see in the Viking area family organization and family situation, it was not so strongly moved between women and men that it's the man who has the power. That could be the women also. And we also know from a lot of history that 50% of the population was slaves. Some of the slaves you owned, some of the slaves become suddenly mothers to important persons, and etc. So the mix in the family before the Christianity has something else. And we want to believe that Ingegerd is a proof of that we have quite important women in this part of our history that we maybe forgot or translate into a Christian family describing. This is a theory. I don't know so much about her. We don't know nearly anything that we can prove. But there is a lot of Snorre Sturlason. He wrote quite a lot about Ingegerd. He's two of the sources. Adam of Bremen is the other one. But Snorre is also a politician. He was strongly fighting for the Icelandic society. He was working as you have been for a long time. If you want to be important, you have to have a history. You have to have an ancient. You have to have important people in your history. We know that the Viking cities was showing when you're coming closer to Sigtuna or another place, the first you meet is the dead people, the tombs of the most important persons. And his story about Ingegerd and the other ones 200 years before him has, of course, we have to see his story through these eyes, that he wanted to build some importance in Icelandic story about what happened in Scandinavia that was there. Well, they are also Scandinavia, but I mean, the things we call Norway, Sweden, and Denmark today, they were their ancestors. But I don't deny that this could have happened. It's as impossible as that I say that she was a more important female leader. There is an information in Adam of Bremen that she was about her birth and her marriage. This is quite possible. What I want to say here is about Sigtuna. We had those churches. We know that there was a lot of education in this church. One of the biggest churches that is now a ruin. We have three ruins you can see. It's St. Lars. It became a school later, but during this period, all books, all things that you can read, every knowledge was collected inside the churches. And she, as a powerful daughter of the king, has probably a good education. She was close to Christianity. She got this. But in the church was also the books that the church forbidden. So you had the opportunity to read a lot of things. There is a lot of archaeologists, items from Sigtuna that shows that people was reading a lot. We know that we can assume that a huge part of the population could read and runes, and they could write runes. We have a lot of small message on the bones where people were telling each other small gossip things that we're doing on SMS today, but on the same level. So they are very on a popular version and on a higher level used in this Sigtuna where maybe Ingegerd was born, or maybe at least she was there for a while. The story about her and Norway, and that she was in love with Olav, but her father, Olav, said, no, you should marry Jaroslav. It's a story about a woman who has no power to decide herself. And I want to think that she had the power to decide. I think with that father and with that knowledge and that position that Sigtuna had, we have to remember that Christianity was the modernism. This was something new, something fantastic. And we have a society where 50% of the population is slaves, and suddenly people from the higher level tells them that we are all equal in the end. That's what something revolutionary. And you made people go into the Christianity. It was easy to get people to believe in this new religion with just one God because of that. And I think Ingegerd was part of this movement and part of this willingness to change the world. And what she and Jaroslav did later in Eastern Europe, we know that she was part of this movement again. So, and yes, I should say that also, that the part of Scandinavia we call Sweden and around Stockholm and Sigtuna, it's closer to east. And we know that also people during this period, the easiest way to travel was by boat. The Viking area was the Scandinavian, very productive to doing new investigations. I lost the word now. But new improvement of making better boats. That's why they could do what they did. And I'm quite sure that it was more logical that she married someone on the other side of the sea than to going through it's already 5 minutes. Wow, I have to go quicker. Ingegerd the Viking, I have to come to the ring. Because this ring is the biggest myth, and it's very important, and it's very good. This ring is found inside, the museum is in the garden of where the oldest church, the ruin of the church. It doesn't, we can only see part of it. And there they found this ring. And Sten Tesch, who is an archaeologist and also was the director then, he had found this, and for the press he said, well, this is small enough so it could be on a young girl. Maybe it was the ring of Ingegerd. And next day in all Swedish media who was interested in history, they said, the ring of Ingegerd is found. And since that we're selling copies a lot, and we all think that it is Ingegerd's ring. It's probably possible. It's probably possible that it's a person from a rich family, because to make a ring like this, and you can see that has probably have been stones and other things on it. For such a young person, has to be some nearly royal at least, or rich, very rich person. She is a diplomat. I'm quite sure that she was deciding and putting her daughters where they became, one of them here in Norway, they became important. And you can say that Ingegerd is ancestor of most of the royal families in Europe for the rest of the period. I'm sure, do I have time? This is an exhibition we have for some years ago that we call From Ingegerd to Estelle. Estelle is the daughter of the Swedish king today, so she's going to be our queen in the future. And Estelle sounds for me like Star Wars. It's a very strange name. but there is someone in his history that had that name before. But from Ingegerd to Estelle is a quite good way to see this story. We have had a lot of princesses with quite important influences. Ingegerd is one of them. Estelle is probably going to be one of them. There is Cecilia Vasa, and others have been really, really naughty and doing strange and important things in history. And we found I've stopped there because I just want to tell about this story, this exhibition. I don't think it's important. This is one of the most important pieces. We were invited some artists, and this is a female artist who made the hand of God, who came into. So it's like a curtain. There is the God's hand is part of the curtain, so it's coming into the room, and that was some kind of an interpretation about the importance of Ingegerd. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted Hesselbom. There are many interesting things that I would comment on or question, but I have to be patient as I ordered you to be. So please wait until the panel afterwards. But then I will ask Akim Galimov to take the floor. A Ukrainian TV producer with Ukraine history as a specialty, and talking about Stolen Queen from Kyiv's tomb, modern technologies in history teaching. Please take the floor.
Thank you. Okay. No, this one, yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation, and of course, thank you for the opportunity to be here today and talk about history. Yesterday, I just arrived from Kyiv, and as other Ukrainians, I know too well the importance of history, particularly when Russia use it as a weapon and try to justify their missile attack because they think that we are still part of Russia, or we have common history, or other things. And of course, it's completely false. So today we are going to watch a piece of videos and to see my presentation. So my name is Akim Galimov, and I'm not a historian. I'm a TV producer. And frankly speaking, before 2014, I hadn't been interested in history. Yeah, and in 2014, as you know, we have the Revolution of Dignity, and of course, hundreds of thousands of people reconsidered who they were and their identity as well. During that time, there was a great public demand on a history and for research on our roots and the roots of Ukraine, and of course, our connection with Western civilization. It was very important for us in that years, and still now. So, this is how the Ukraine returning its own history project was born. This is a series of documentaries where we talk about pages of history unknown to the general public, I mean to the big audience. And so, what is the problem? The more we delve into history, the more we jump into history, the more obvious it becomes that many artifacts were stolen and taken to Russia during Ukraine's time as part of the Russian Empire and Soviet Union as well. And many facts are falsified in favor of Russia. And the story of this skull, which, as we would later learn, most likely belonged to Princess Ingegerd, is also a mystery shrouded in darkness. So, in the beginning, my team started collecting facts that could be interesting for our film. And I remember Googling this history of this sarcophagus in the St. Sophia Cathedral. And really, I was shocked to learn that it held someone's remains, because we have a really big problem with this in Ukraine. After many wars of the past, after after the Soviet regime, after the scientists from the Russian Empire, Ukraine has billion burial sites of our heroes left. And no kings, no our princes, no our Cossack headsmans, no one. And the graves were destroyed along with the remains, or they were taken to Moscow. Let's return to our story. So I learned there is a skeleton in that sarcophagus. So as it turned out, a few years before that, scientists had opened the sarcophagus and they examined the skeleton. They even did a CT scan, it's a computer tomography scan. And I called Inna Potechina, she's head of the Department of Bioarchaeology at the National Institute of Archaeology of Ukraine, to ask her about the skeleton. And she said that it was suspected to be the Swedish Princess Ingegerd. And I was shocked. Before that, I had never heard of her. Secondly, I started wondering how it happens that a woman who might be the daughter of King Olav lay in our sarcophagus in downtown Kyiv, but we knew almost nothing about her. I know what you're thinking. So what's this guy talking about? Because we have a dozen of books of this princess. Yeah, sure. But I talk about popular history and what ordinary people know about this woman, in particular in Ukraine. Nothing. So that's when I decided to try to make a 3D reconstruction of this woman's face. After all, we had CT images of her skeleton, and we also had to make sure that this skeleton could definitely belong to Ingegerd, and it was a problem. In our TV lab, built specifically for the documentary, we studied photos and X-rays. Anthropologist Sergei Segeda, this guy, confirmed that this skull definitely belonged to a person who came from the northern lands, right where the Vikings lived. And we started to look for a way to reproduce a person behind the skull in 3D. Yeah. This is actually very old technology. One of the creators of this technology is the famous Soviet anthropologist Mikhail Gerasimov. In the middle of the 20th century, Gerasimov reconstructed the face of Prince Yaroslav the Wise. This is the husband of Ingegerd. And he used special plasticine, which he applied in layers according to the anthropological features of the bones. And I found an expert in Ukraine who called himself a follower of Gerasimov, but he wanted $10,000 for this job. And we didn't have this kind of budget, of course. And the second problem was that in order to restore with plasticine, you need to physically have a skull, and we don't have it. We have only these X-ray photos. And then we started looking in Europe and found a faculty lab at the Department of Forensic Medicine of the Karl Marcinkowski Medical University in Poznan, Poland. They usually cooperate with the police and recreate dead people whose remains are unidentified. But they were so interested in our investigations that they agreed to help. So we sent the pictures there. A month later, I went to Poland, and let's watch a clip from the documentary and what we got there.
To see the first results of Ingegerd face reconstruction. On my way there, I think about symbolic role of the great princess in both Russian and Ukrainian history. Her great-grandson founded Moscow. If one looks at Rus princess genealogy, it becomes clear that Kyiv is not the part of Russian history. On the contrary, Russia is only the derivative of Kyiv's history. We are here finally. They await us at the Karl Marcinkowski Medical University Department of Forensic Medicine. Good afternoon.
Hello. Hello.
How is work going so far?
We've already gone through several stages and made the skull model based on the data you send us. I'll show you everything in a moment.
This is Dorota Lorkevich-Mushinska. She's a candidate of medical sciences. She's been reconstructed people's appearances from the bones more than 20 years.
This is Mikhail Rychlik. He works on the 3D model of the skull.
Good afternoon. Hello. The task isn't easy, is it? It wasn't easy. First, we had to analyze and process all the images from the computer tomography. As a result, we got the image of the skull that looked like an X-ray. So we do it to obtain the skull which we don't have. Yes. And the most complicated part, to give the anatomical shape to the skull, because mandible, it was separated at the computer tomography. As you see, everything is in its place now.
The virtual model of the skull made it possible to measure it up, and as a result, a serious question arose whether it was a female after all, because the bones are very thick, which is more typically for men. But then we investigated other bones, the pelvic ones, for instance, and saw it was a female.
What can you say about the chin and the nose?
I can say from this model she had a very big cheekbones and the prominent chin. The skull itself is very massive. I would say she had a very impressive look.
Now, when Polish scientists have the model of the skull, they move on to the most sophisticated task, the reconstruction of Yaroslav the Wise's wife appearance.
We still have to get through many stages, but we ourselves are curious to know what will she turn up to be like.
It's some problem with the sound and videos. Yeah, after a few more weeks, we received an intermediate stage of our work, and let me show it to you. Not bad. Yeah. This is a 3D Ingegerd's face reconstruction by Dorota, and of course without like a factoring, without skin and without color of skin, of hair and other one. At the same time, we tried to highlight not only Ingegerd's appearance but also her character. This is extremely difficult considering that she lived 1,000 years ago. Here the Scandinavian sagas came in handy. And we shot a great episode in Sweden. I show you.
Of the most powerful states, her daughter Anna married to French King Henry I and became the Queen of France. Anastasia took the royal throne in Hungary. Elizabeth married to the King of Norway. Her son Vsevolod was married to the Byzantine Emperor's daughter, and Ihor to the German princess. Her family ties made Ingegerd the most powerful woman in the history of the old Europe. But why we didn't know anything about it?
We don't know where do we come from, and we must know it.
Our team splits in order to find out if it's really Ingegerd remains resting in Kyiv sarcophaguses. Ruslan flies to Sweden to collect facts about Ingegerd in her motherland. As for me, I'll be looking for information in the historical sources about her becoming Russian Anna of Novgorod. I need to find old biographical dictionaries in the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra Library. There must be something we're looking for. Anna, the great princess, the saint Irina before taking monastic vows, known as Ingegerd in heathendom, the wife of the great Prince Yaroslav I, the daughter of Swedish King Olav, passed away on the 10th of February 1051. Her remains rest openly in Novgorod Sophia's cathedral. By the Russian version, Ingegerd went to the monastery in Novgorod and died there. Meanwhile, Ruslan arrives to the Swedish town of Sigtuna. He has to meet Lars Leonroth, professor of the Gothenburg University, who is the world's most famous researcher of Scandinavian sagas. He knows everything about ancient royal dynasties. Hello. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Why did you make our appointment here? Sigtuna is the ancient Swedish capital. There was King Olaf's Ingegerd father, residence here in the age of the Vikings. Can we find any portraits or details of Ingegerd's private life here? In order to get this information, we have to go to Uppsala. to the university library called Karolina Rediviva. There's Ingegert's description in the manuscript from 13th century that is kept there. We happen to have the unique chance to get the information that has never gotten in any Ukrainian history schoolbooks. What did Yaroslav the Wise's wife look like? This is the legendary Olaf's the Saint saga. I think it's the most interesting among the sources where Ingegerd and her marriage with Yaroslav are mentioned. Let me read you in some Old Norse.
Yaroslav konungi fenget hafðu Ingegerdar dóttur Olavs konungs sænska.
What do they say about Ingegerd here? How do they describe her? She is described as an extremely proud, tenacious person and very gorgeous woman at the same time. She was very independent. Some sources describe her as a good politician. One of the sagas tells that the Swedish princess's beauty made Yaroslav literally to lose his head. He built a huge palace for his wife and covered all its walls with the expensive fabrics. Do you think she could take her vows and go to the monastery? I don't think so. There is no information in our sources about her becoming a nun. She is described as a solely secular queen. A couple of years ago, I visited Novgorod and saw for the first time the burial with Ingegerd's name on it. It seemed strange to me, very strange. If I'm not mistaken, she died in 1050th year. She and Yaroslav lived in Kyiv at that time. It would have been more natural if she was buried there.
So, step by step, we discovered the figure of Ingegerd, and naturally, we were looking forward to the final 3D reconstruction of her face. What I will show next is how Ingegerd might have looked. Why might have? Because we don't know the color of her eyes, we don't know the color of her hair, we don't know her hairstyle or many other details needed to understand what a person really looked like. But we are positive about general features, and this is already a lot of the I think that this is a lot of the identification of a person who lived 1,000 years ago. So yeah, this is the last video that I want to show you.
Everything. For 10 centuries, unknown remains had been resting in St. Sophia sarcophagus, but now the secret is uncovered. In a moment, you will see a woman who used to drive crazy the medieval rulers and conquered Yaroslav the Wise's heart 1,000 years ago. Nearly all European royal dynasties are her descendants, as well as we are. The experts from the Medical University of Karol Marcinkovsky, where people's images are restored by their bones, finished the reconstruction of Ingegerd's appearance. This model portrays the princess when she was 55 years old. She's quite extraordinary, with white face and massive features, just as Scandinavian sagas and the modern anthropologists described her. Polish experts conducted this expensive research absolutely free of charge, realizing how important for the history her face was.
So, yeah, she is. As we watched before, that there is another big issue behind the reconstruction process, namely historical falsification of Russia, which tries to claim Kievan Rus heritage as its own as much as possible, which is contrary of historical facts. As you know, the official Russian narrative about Ingegerd is that the princess is buried in Novgorod, Russia. She was canonized as a saint in the 15th century by Moscow Church. Even Ingegerd page on Russian Wikipedia claims that her remains are not in the sarcophagus in Kyiv, just in Novgorod. An English page provides both versions, either Kyiv or Novgorod, and Ukrainian version, of course, talk about that Ingegerd is in Kyiv. So, after our research, this face of, like, potentially Ingegerd. Now, the management of the National Museum of Sofia of Kyiv, where a sarcophagus with remains is located, decided to add our 3D reconstruction to their exposition. So now all visitors to the museum can see the face of this mysterious princess from the tomb. that is our story of her face, and I think we did good job for the history popularization, because it's really true that before our film, little people in Ukraine know about her. So I think that we give a motivation to go to Wikipedia, to check some information about her, and to know more about this amazing woman in our history. So thank you very much. Oh, I just forgot to, sorry, I just forgot to add, yeah, just one more reconstruction. It was the second episode of our film. We made it next year after the first one, and we tried to, we decided to make a 3D reconstruction of Yaroslav the wife, the husband of Ingegerd. And of course, the problem was we didn't have a skull, as in Ingegerd case, and we also didn't have a CT photos, because his bones disappeared somewhere in the history. But we had this reconstruction, Soviet reconstruction by Gerasimov, and we used this version just to make it more younger, yeah, just to imagine how he looked like in the age of 45, 50 years, because here is just about 60 probably, or something like this. Yeah, and yeah, he looks like David Beckham a little bit, I think. So, yeah, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Akim. You have really made this magnetic woman alive for us. She's with us now. And in the presence, the way she brought or inspired all the visitors that came to Kyiv at that time is just unimaginable. And we'll probably come back to that afterwards. Now, she, Ingegerd, at least had daughters, and one of them became the Queen of Norway, Ellisiv. And even here, the traces are few, but still enough to inspire our imagination. And I invite you, Gunnar Jørgensen, to come to the floor and see what this sagas can tell us about Ingegerd.
Oh, thank you. You hear me? Good. I know the time is short, but I can't resist beginning with a small digression. If you visit the Historical Museum in Oslo, you can see a big rune stone from the farm Alstad in Toten, Norway. And here you can read a message in memory of a man named Torald, who died between Ustaholm and Gardar. And you can read on the stone, Engli reiste stein fenna efter Torald son sin, es var dauder in Vitaholmi, midli Ustaholms og Gardar. Engli raised this stone after Torald, his son, who died in Vitaholm between Ustaholm and Gardar. And Vitaholm is located by the river Dniepro in Ukraine, southeast of Kyiv. The carving is dated to the middle of the 11th century and confirms connections between Norway and the Kyiv kingdom 1,000 years back. At least two Norwegian medieval kings had close relations to Kyiv. First, Olav Haraldsson, the saint, Then, a few years later, his younger half-brother, Harald the Hard Ruler, who was in charge when these runes were carved. Here's Saint Olav. We will turn back to him. And here's Harald the Hard Ruler. You can see on the wall of the City Hall of Oslo, the western wall. You understand it's the big one, not the little one in the corner. But he was supposed to have founded the city of Oslo, actually. But later historians have protested against that. That's another story. Well, according to the king's sagas, Olav was exiled in Gardarike at the court of Grand Prince Yaroslav after having abandoned his kingdom in the year 1028, until he decided to try to regain his kingdom, 1030. Yaroslav's queen, as we have met, I knew she was beautiful, but not as beautiful as we just saw. Yaroslav's queen was the Swedish Ingegerd Olofsdotter. She was King Olav's sister-in-law. Not only that, she was first engaged to Olav, but her father, the king, broke the promise and married her to Yaroslav. Royal marriages were, of course, arranged. What's happening here? It's not here. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Royal marriages were, of course, arranged in order to build alliances. The intention of a marriage between the Norwegian king and the Swedish princess was to calm conflicts and secure peace between the neighboring countries. This arrangement was highly recommended by the Norwegian and Swedish noblemen and advisors. The Swedish king, however, was more skeptical, and we have met him before as well. It was Olav Skjøtkonung. And it's a little confusing because both the Norwegian king and the Swedish king had the name Olav. He was skeptical and driven by jealousy and anger towards his Norwegian colleague. He broke the promise. He may have seen greater benefits in an alliance with Kyiv. However, according to the sagas, the change of plans were caused by jealousy and against Ingegerd's will. There are few women in the king's sagas that have caught so much attention from the authors as Ingegerd. She is portrayed as a strong, gifted, energetic, and very brave woman. She is quite aware of the political importance of her marriage and discusses it with diplomats and advisors on both sides. The interactions between between Olav and Ingegerd are referred in many Norwegian and Icelandic sources. The oldest one is from the Middle of the 12th century, and it is the Latin Historia de Antiquitate Regum Norvagiensum, history of the old Norwegian kings, written by a monk called Theodoricus. The text is very brief, but describes Ingegerd as a woman with a political influence and strength. We find a similar picture of Ingegerd in a row of king's sagas in the Old Norse language then. First in Ågrip from about 1190, the legendary saga of St. Olav from about 1210. I could mention that in the clip we just saw from the Royal Library in Stockholm. They were examining this legendary saga with my old friend and colleague Lasse Lønneroth. Further on, we have Morkenskinna from around 1215, Fagerskinna from around 1220, and then Heimskringla around 1230. And also we meet her in other compilations all the way to Flatøyabok from the end of the 14th century. It's Heimskringla that gives us the most extensive picture of Ingegerd. And according to Heimskringla, the relation between Svearike and Norway was very tensed. And in order to secure peace for both parties, the Norwegian King Olav sent a diplomatic delegation to Svearike, offering to respect the old borders. And to consolidate the treaty, he asked to marry Princess Ingegerd. We can have a picture of Olav open so you see who we're talking about. Influential Swedish noblemen and chieftains supported the Norwegian delegation, and also Ingegerd herself became eager to accomplish the plan and marry Olav. The king, however, was furious and opposed, but at the assembly he was forced by the chieftains and farmers to accept it. Shortly later, however, he broke his promise and married Ingegerd to Prince Jaroslav. And later, Olav married Ingegerd's half-sister Astrid, as we heard Ted telling us. The diplomatic negotiation between the Norwegian delegation and the Swedes is referred in detail with emphasis on Ingegerd's own active part in the game. Ingegerd accepted the Norwegian offer, and she was also brave enough to stand up for it against her father. Later, she reluctantly agreed to marry Jaroslav, but made certain claims. And the first claim was that her father had to send with her important and valuable men, certain men, and among them her friend Earl Ragnvald, who had supported her in the engagement to Olav, and who had also arranged the marriage between Olav and her sister Astrid against the king's will. So by taking him with her to Kyiv, she protected him from the king's anger. She also claimed a bridal gift from Yaroslav, which was the city Aldeyuborg, far west in today's Russia. It's the old city Staraya Ladoga, lying in western Russia near Sweden. Under the rule of Olav, the Norwegian Olav, the balance between the king and the chieftains was vulnerable. And in 1028, Olav had to give up his kingdom and leave the country. He then took exile in Kyiv. Here, Heimskringla tells that Olav and his men were welcomed with great honor by Yaroslav and Ingegerd. We understand that it is a warm friendship between Olav and the queen. Ingegerd and Yaroslav encouraged Olav to stay by offering him a province to rule. It was called Bulgaria and is by the river Volga, so it's far east in the realm. But Olav decides to return to Norway, and they support him in his attempt to regain the kingdom. Before we leave Ingegerd, let us have a brief look on another saga work, the Morkinskinna, from around 1215. It begins with the saga of Harald the Hard Ruler, Olav's half-brother. But before that, it brings an entertaining anecdote about Ingegerd and Yaroslav, dating to the time before Olav's exile. Yaroslav had raised an impressive hall, beautifully decorated with gold. Ted mentioned it as well. He proudly presents the building to Ingegerd and asks her whether she ever had seen or known any king who owns such a great hall. And Ingegerd answers, well, the hall is all right, but King Olav in Norway has one that's even better. The king, of course, or Yaroslav, gets furious and slaps her in the face, accusing her for still having warm feelings for Olav. And the proud queen cannot accept such a behavior and threatens to leave him. Her court, however, advises her to conciliate, and she does. But in return, she claims from her husband to send a ship to Norway and offer King Olav to foster his son Magnus. And Olav accepts this honorable offer. So according to Morkinskinna, Magnus, Olav's son, was brought to Kyiv before Olav's exile. Later, after Olav's death, a delegation comes to Kyiv to bring Magnus home, as we also read in Theodoricus, the Latin text I mentioned. The delegation negotiate with Ingegerd, not with Yaroslav, and she is kind of skeptical and refuses to overgive Magnus before the men swear to make him king. And that is also what happens later. Here and in all the Norse sources, Ingegerd is given an active political role, unlike most other female characters in the sagas. And then some words about Ellisiv. Yaroslav and Ingegerd had this daughter, Ellisiv, or Elisabeth. In the saga, she is named Elizabeth, or as we call her in Norse, Ellisiv. With her, the connections to Norway was kept and developed, as she was married to Harald the Hard Ruler. We can go back to the picture of Harald. There you are. The sagas are not quite as generous with the descriptions of Ellisiv as with her mother, Ingegerd. Heimskringla and Morkinskinna tell roughly the same story. Harald came with his army to Kyiv and was welcomed there, not least due to his older half-brother Olav. After a while, he asked Jaroslav to let him marry Ellisiv. And Jaroslav answered kindly and accommodating, but he thought the proposal came a little too early. Harald had not yet achieved the wealth and power appropriate for such a noble marriage. Then Harald left Kyiv and served the king of Miklagard for some time. Then he returned to Kyiv, richer and more famous, and proposed for Ellisiv, and got her. We learn that Harald and Ellisiv had two daughters, Maria and Ingegerd. The latter became queen first of Denmark and then of Sweden. And before I leave, according to the sagas, Harald also married another woman, Tora. But this is most likely built on a misunderstanding and not historically correct. But anyway, Tora is never called a queen, even when the saga mentions the two together, Ellisiv and Tora. Then Ellisiv is titled queen, not Tora. Thank you.
Please, now I ask the panel to take the floor. Tore Skeie is going to administrate and keep the panel in order. Now it's also time for the questions that I suppose that you still have remembered. But first of all, Tore Skeie, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Even though I don't have it. I have to hold it? Yeah. Okay. Sånn som dette? Fint. Well, thank you, all three of you. Very interesting talks about a figure and a period in history that perhaps me more than most find very fascinating. I'm an historian myself and I've studied this period. And it was very fascinating to see the reconstructions of Ingegerd's face. I always find such reconstructions so interesting because even though I'm an historian, I feel like I need to be reminded often that these figures are not only characters in stories and in fiction, but they are actually, they used to be real people, human beings, just like us. And Ingegerd, I really wish we had more time to discuss this, and even we could have more people here with us to discuss this, because Ingegerd is such an important and fascinating figure, because I think she embodies several very fundamental truths about the world 1,000 years ago that is often overlooked today. And the first of those truths is that Europe 1,000 years ago was much more connected than we are used to think about. The different parts and landscapes and countries were much more connected to each other. And the people connecting the different parts were very often women like Ingegerd, who traveled and married kings in distant countries and represented their home countries there. So you have this this web of connections with these women as the nodes connecting everyone to everyone else. And she's also a striking example of how women in the Middle Ages and in the Viking Age were certainly part of political life. They had agency and were active politicians beside the kings. But before we start discussing more about Ingegerd's person, I think it would be useful to try to set the context a little bit, because in Norway we have all read about this distant land called Gardarike. And for me, growing up, I thought of it, to be honest, as like a fairy tale place. It sounds very exotic and very strange. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what this realm actually was. Maybe, Jon Gunnar, you could start by saying a little bit about how this Gardarike is depicted in the sagas. What kind of place is it described as?
Yeah, it is not very strictly defined.
No.
But as I also mentioned in my talk, we hear about two named places in this realm, and the distance between them is huge. First, we hear that Olav is offered this what is called province to rule. Which is called in the saga Bulgaria, which is not Bulgaria but Bulgaria, which is far east by the river Volga. And then Ingegerd, she claims to have this city Avlejuborg, which is the old city Staraya Laloga, which is far west, close to Sweden, at the Eastern Sea, or Finnish. So the realm is considered huge, but not strictly defined.
No, right.
No.
And what is the meaning of the word Gardarike?
Oh yeah. The second half is is clear, isn't it? It's a realm, rike. Garder is a fence, actually, something that is located inside a fence. So it must have been a very long fence. Yeah. But Garda is a plural. The realm of the limited areas.
I see. Like in towns and
towns,
settlements?
Yes,
Okay.
I guess so. Yeah.
So Akim, perhaps you would like to comment. How do you see? Of course, Gardarike is a word we use in Scandinavia, and I suppose it has many names. The land of the Rus, but most commonly we call it the Kyivan Rus. Could you say a few words about what this realm was like and how you see it?
Yeah, I want to add just about the name of Gardarike. I also had the version that is, you are completely right. That it's like a guard, like something inside the defense. So it's kind of cities. So the Gardarike, it's like the land of many cities. Something around. So if you talk about Kyivan Rus, it's probably the same of Gardarike, but in Ukrainian or Russian language, I think little Ukrainians, by the way, know this name, Gardarike.
No.
Yeah, if you ask someone in Ukraine what is Gardarike, probably the answer will be, what? Gordarika? We don't know what is Gordarika, but we know Kievan Rus because Kievan Rus it's like our knowledge about this time from our school. We know that in our past we have Kievan Rus. So it was a state, yeah, like in Ukraine. The thing that's our like the first state in modern explanation of what state means, yeah. So this state started from just 3 regions in modern Ukraine. This is Kyiv, Pereyaslav, and Chernihiv. It's even now it's 3 modern cities. Kyiv is the capital of Ukraine, and little cities Chernihiv and Pereyaslav. And it's not very big territory, but then of course it will be bigger. And so Kievan Rus, yeah, this is the important part of our history. And it's as you said, yeah, it's a big territory, yeah, from like a Hungary border until like Lagod or Novgorod, yeah, and somewhere there. So yeah, and of course a lot of our first rules. I mean, the Yaroslav the Wise, Volodymyr the Great. It's like fondators of our state, I mean Ukraine. And this is, by the way, the problem with Russia, because they also think that this is their founders. You know, it's sometimes it's very close. For example, to conflict between France and German when they talk about Karl's great heritage. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and then if we look at the Kremlin, by the way, we can see like a huge monument of Volodymyr the Great, and it's by the way by Vladimir Putin. It's managed this monument there several years ago. Yeah, and of course then if we ask, okay, Volodymyr the Great, but where was the Moscow during the Volodymyr the Great times? No Moscow in that times. So this is the question, and of course we have to find like some solution in the future how we have to live with this common past with Russia, because now it's a important reason of this conflict, of this war, this common past.
Yeah. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, but just I forgot. The name is commonly used in the sagas, and the sagas are written, as I mentioned, in the mainly 13th century. But the name Gardar is also appears also in the runic inscription that I showed you. So, and that's from the middle of the 11th century. Mm-hmm. So the name must have been in use for about a long time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'll follow up a little bit, Akim, because on the use of history and today, because how to start? To me, it seems that in Norway, 1,000 years ago, we had a lot of connections to Eastern Europe, but this is not very well known. The connections to the West are much more well known by most people, is my impression, in Norway today. I think that has to do with the Cold War, but it's probably older than that. We live. In our identity, we think of ourselves as living in a world divided between East and West, and we live in the West. I wanted to ask you, Ted, how does this apply to Sweden? Because it's Ingegerd and the many connections between the Swedish elite and the rulers of Rus, or Gardarika, or whatever you want to call it. How well known are these in Sweden?
Wow, it's a big question.
Yeah,
no, but for this book we just finished, that comes in September, we were looking at this period and saying where is the Viking area? Where is it physically? Where does it stop? Where does it end it? And we was early decided we should never use words like Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. We should say Scandinavia. We should say Scandinavian. And actually, when you go to the border of where the Scandinavia that we call it, these countries today, where they ended, is not where something was changing. So a lot of part of that we today called southern of Denmark, or Finland, or east of Sweden, there was the same kind of population, the same kind of cultural heritage. We have a lot of items, archaeology items in Sigtuna and Scandinavia and Visby in Gotland that is exactly the same as on the other side, eastern. And of course, there is also, if you see physically how did they go there, they were going by boats, and if you follow the rivers, you know where you come to, and Kyiv is there. It's quite important, and it's very close. So I think the connection, I think we should start take away the Norwegian or the Swedish or the Danish filter. Yes, because I think the eastern part of Scandinavia had, of course, more connection with countries on the east, and vice versa. And in Sweden, for a long time, we have been jealous that maybe the Danish and the Norwegians owned all the story about Normandy and England. But it's logical, but it has nothing to do with countries, because I don't really think that there were anything like Sweden and Denmark and Norway at that time. There was a lot of... We should remember that it was mostly like a mafia system. You can have different rulers and people together with them in the same town, the same, or like Romeo and Julia. It was still like the system of you having the power of people, not the power of area, and then you change the story, and I think it's a complicated answer, but I think it's important.
Yeah. It's a complicated issue. Yeah. Thank you. Akim, to me it seems that Ukraine right now is in a process that is accelerated by the war going on, but that started long before the war, of maybe reshaping or rediscovering or reshaping the national identity, and removing its connections to Russia, to Russian identity, do you feel like historic knowledge of this ancient period and the early days of Kyiv and Rus is important in that regard, and is becoming more? Is people in Ukraine becoming more aware of this and more interested in this, you think? Yeah, or will they be when the war is over and they have more time to think about this?
I think so. Yeah. It's now it's very important, and it was started from 2014 after the Revolution of Dignity, because for last 70 years we know the history just through the Russian filters. Yeah, so we know that we started from Moscow. We have Moscow Tsar, and Moscow rulers, Kremlin, and Stalin, and a lot of other guys. And of course, it was huge propaganda. It was very important to understand that our history started not from Moscow, not from Kremlin, not from that guy. Yeah, we have the other very important part of history connected to Western civilization. Of course, it's a bit maybe like a politician views. Yeah, like look at this through like Western and Eastern. Yeah, but for us, it's important to feel that we are the part of this civilization, and we have a connection with the Scandinavian countries, with other countries. Yeah, the Anna Queen, was the France Queen. So it's also very important for us that it was a lot of connection. So yeah, and we continue to find our roots even now. And of course, the war, it's like a engine of this process, because we want to build a big wall between Russia and Ukraine and live on this side of the civilization. This is our choice. So yeah, it's important for us.
Thank you. I have many more questions, but we are simply out of time. We're only given 15-20 minutes to talk, so I think I will have to move on and direct or ask the audience if you have any questions to the panelists. In the back there, yes?
So, my name is Bjørn Berger. I've been particularly interested in Russian disinformation and propaganda. And I discovered also that generally media in Norway and also other countries has been, you can say, not so good at discovering what Russia did in Donbass, for example. And it's like they thought that Russian disinformation is just about something happening in Russia and something which is not really important for us. Like we are not really affected, but we were affected. And then I also, for the last couple of weeks, have been studying exactly what you've been talking about now, about history, because like we know, Putin has abused the history. But also when I started to investigate in this and go back to Norwegian literature, articles, much of this history about Kievan Rus has been Russified. It says many, many articles also from researchers, from scholars, Norwegian scholars. They describe, for example, Kyiv like Russia. And this is very important to understand. And I think when you just consider history to be something that happened a long time ago, that's not really true. And for Putin especially, and also I think for Eastern European people, history matters much more than we understand. But then I would like to have a question, because I think that it was very interesting what you said about it was not really countries. Here in Norway, we had a huge scientific project around year 2000, where they said that and claimed that Norway has been a neighbor of Russia for 1,000 years. Norway, it didn't exist, Russia, 1,000 years ago. But then I started to wonder also, what about Novgorod? Because after a while, we know when we came into the 12th and 13th century, Novgorod Republic was established. Later it was annexed by Moscow. So my question is to you scholars, how do you consider Novgorod? Because here in Norway, it has been described as Russia. And I can't understand that it's true. Because I think that Norway have only had border to Russia for 500 years. That's my question.
Was that to me? Yeah, well, I think it's complicated to look at this 10,000 years ago as countries. And I think more like Sigtuna, Olof Konung made coins and says that he's king of Sweden, but probably he's king of an area like a city. And we have to I'm quite sure that if we see how people was acting and how power was ruined, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about today with areas. So if you take away that images, it's not important, but there was no anger, there was no Ukraine, there was no Russia, there was no Sweden either. There was Kiev, and Kiev was important. There was Novgorod, and that was important. And that this is points where they started to build things. And it's much later in the history that we start to claim other bigger areas. And if we accept that, it's much easier to see this period of history that is between this that we call Viking era in Sweden, but the early Middle Age and what's coming in. When with the Christianity, we unify countries, we start to make Europe being equal, and everyone wants to become the big Rome that has fallen, or we call fallen, but it was still there in the East. But we say, but the new Franco-Rike and the new things happening in Germany, they are trying to reconstruct something. That's what's happening. But what's happening in Easter during this period and in Scandinavia is much more small movements in a mafia solution, I think.
Any more questions or comments?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Tore Valaker. I'm a Norwegian. And I think it was very many correct observations from the last person making a question here, and also from Akim, who said something about the importance of history for today, for perceptions of today. But I will not indulge in that. My question is, I want to just to say thank you for arranging this very important seminar to the association who is doing that, Ukrainian Association of Norway. And I would like to go back a little bit to the woman. I think we've started to forget about the woman here, Ingegerd, who was why we were invited to this seminar, and immediately started talking about very many interesting other features regarding history. But as far as I understand, the woman Ingegerd, she had an immense influence, impact on her time, not only in Kyiv, but also in Norway. She raised Magnus Olavsson in Kyiv for several years, or she had him living there at least. Whether she raised him, I don't know. And later she gave one of her daughters to the Norwegian king, who was she was probably queen for 20 years of Norway, along with her husband. And several other of her daughters became queens of other European countries as well. I would like you to say something more about this impact that Ingegerd maybe had, if there is something else you could add to what you already have been touching upon. Thank you.
Gunnar, you...
I could follow up a little bit. What is striking is that she appears in so many sources. And the sources also agree very well. And this description of her as a strong and brave woman with her own political goals, we can see already in the first, the oldest, very brief Latin history. She's given her own will, and she acts in the diplomatic negotiations. And in the most extensive description, the Heimskringla, the chapter where Ingegerd acts is it's many chapters. It's so extensive that it has got its own name, the Fridgerdar saga, the saga of making peace. And all these accords that I mentioned in my talk agree to a high extent. It's the same picture, and I can't think of any other female character in the saga, in the King sagas, that has got as much oppmerksomhet, touch as Ingegerd. There is another queen that has also a very strong political role, the Queen Gunhild, the queen of Eirik Blodøks. But the descriptions are not that detailed and extensive. So she's special.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It was extremely interesting to see these finds from this sarcophagus in Kyiv and this reconstruction. And I have to say I've been both places, in Kyiv and in Novgorod, and also I have been very interested in this figure of Saint Anne of Novgorod, which I have heard so many times is identical with Ingegerd. So my question now is, who then is this Anna of Novgorod who is resting in the Cathedral of Sofia, which is from dating about 1050, the cathedral which is in the northern capital, so to say, of the Kievan Rus Principality?
Well, yes. I have a theory. No, but I think Ingegerd is important because she proves that the woman could be very powerful and rule things and had something to decide. And I'm sure that she did it. And I also think it's important to put her in this paradigm between Asa's beliefs and the Christianity. She makes it here in Scandinavia. She's important here in Norway and in Sweden. And she does it in Ukraine. That's what we call Ukraine today. She in Yaroslav is saint because of that they Christianity, this area of the world. So, but I think that also we have to understand what Christianity was then. Today is something traditional, something old-fashioned. Then it was something new, something modern that changed the view of people. Said that also the slaves are equal as the others in the end. And that's very, very strange in this period. We should remember that half of the population is owned by the other part. They were not slaves like we see in the history of the American and the industry of black people. It was much more. Slaves were part of the family. People were living closer. They was laying in your bed to make it warm before you went there. I mean, you were living very close to the ones that was owned. But suddenly, this half of the population feels that there is something strange, bigger changing. And she was one of this who was going this story. So if I was such a strong believer, as I think she was, it should be the optimal to be a nun in the end. I think I can't see that there is anything against that. Of course, if she was in Novgorod or in Kyiv, it's a political issue now, but wherever she went, I think she wanted to go closer to this belief, the Christianity, and it was to give all her belief to God. I think that's reasonably a logical way of a woman who is so much described as powerful, intellectual, and know what she's doing. So that's why I think it's Ingegerd, all of it. And I mean, there is a lot of Catholic pieces of saints that are all over the world, and this is a long time ago, so of course there is a lot of pieces that maybe not is the same person.
Yes, there was someone. Did you raise your hand before? Yeah. Okay, it's your turn. No.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Skal du fette på?
Thanks so much. Natalia Yeremeeva, the Association of Ukrainians in Norway. Just would like to thank all of you for this fantastic presentations and inspiring discussion. And I would like to turn back to the beginning of this panel when you, Tore, mentioned the issue of interconnectedness of the world and how it was in the historical times. And when we look at the time back and immediately turn a review to the migration of the current times, we understand that migration is not really a crisis, that this is a reality which we lived in from 1,000 years back. And this kind of interconnectedness, it kind of defines how the world really is, but people usually not really think about that. And when we look back at history, and as a Ukrainian, I know what Akim was talking about and how Ingegerd's name is completely unknown to people in Ukraine, even though history is being studied very thoroughly in the country, compared to, for example, how it is here in Norway, when we see that the historical knowledge is extremely fragmented, and children hardly know most of the facts mentioned here. So I understand the project that Akim has about the popularization of history and making it more available to the public. But my question really is, how can we bring the times together and let the current generation have a better understanding that the times we live in are not so unique and we can learn from the past? How can we make history more appealing to kids, for example, here in Scandinavia, for them to understand the context a bit better. Do you have any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Anyone want to comment on that?
I think it's a question for Ted, because he's director of museums, so he works with the people directly. So
yeah, I can answer if I love to answer. No, but I mean, history is super interesting all the time, and history is mostly built, and we are more interesting when we are in some kind of situation that we are divided or our country is unified. I mean, when Sweden lost Finland, we had to describe, we have to unify us, we have to understand the new thing. And when the Swedish king won Norway from Denmark, then the history things in Norway to build something to prove that we don't need to be with them, we are alone. I mean, and this happened with Czechoslovakia that I grew up with. Now it's 2 countries. When that's happening, you need the history. And this is exactly what happened after the Roman Empire was falling apart. And most of this nation histories we have today is constructed by nidbild. I don't know the word in English, nidbild. Well, no. Well, no, the Roman people was making stories about this who live in the outskirts, and they was like making jokes and making them more grotesque or something. And those stories was then used by these people who was suddenly lost and didn't have the Roman Empire to belong to. You have to start to build your own histories. And this, I think, this is what's happening all the time. And this is history. And we are in different levels. And we have to accept that we need it. And it's changing all the time. And that's why it's so fantastic to work with it.
Yeah. I very much agree with that. It changes all the time. And I think maybe a problem today is that the questions that we ask of historical sources and historical documents are formulated a long time ago by different people, and they are not and they're not really addressed to a modern public, sort of. So it's more like we have to tell these traditional stories to everyone because it's important for our identity or something. But to me as an historian, I think history is endless. And it can change. You can ask it different questions, and you can find something in our daily lives or in our world that we feel are important, and we can look for that in history instead of ancient stories about national states that was formulated 100 years ago. So I think it's a lot that can be done, really. But I'm not the one that's supposed to answer the questions.
May I say one?
Yes.
You should read about Finland. This period about Finland. They have none of these issues about being naturalistic. They were all the time owned by someone else. And their naturalistic story is very, very late. So the ancient history of Finland is one of the most important because it's pure out of this kind of other issues. There is a new book written recently. I don't remember the author, but is a professor of Helsinki. You should read it. Sorry.
Thank you. Your turn.
My name is Armin Myklebust. I'm a journalist by profession, and I've been working in Russia and Ukraine partly from 2000 to a couple of years ago. On my first expedition east, I was approached by Viktor Ulanov, who presented himself as working with cultural exchange between Russia and Norway for many years. He later confessed that he was working for FSB, and one of his prime projects was with Stiklestad. And there was a Russian choir, maybe before 2000, but at least from 2000, and every summer, a few years, that was paid and organized by FSB. And he said that from the very top, Stiklestad was important for Russia. And also Putin's history telling is also the same, Russia trying to grab Ukrainian culture. And in 2030, there's 1,000 years jubilee, and according to this people in Russia that I met, they have big plans. They also set up a Russian Orthodox church or chapel a couple of years ago. Thank you.
Could you explain why is Stiklestad so important for Russia?
I can't, it's a too long story to start here now, but it's in Putin's narrative.
Okay. Can I make it a little addition? Yeah, you know, it's very. You talk about FSB. By the way, it's very interesting. I just talk you about in Russia. They have like a very important history. Like the main history organization who manage like the all Russian historian politics, like state politics, yeah. And it was Российское историческое общество, Russian like a history organization. It's yeah. And the head of this organization is Mr. Narishkin. Mr. Narishkin is also the head of their the main spy agency. Like, yeah, it's a service of abroad in intelligence. Yeah, so and it's very interesting. This is the one country in the world where is like the main people in history, politics, also the main spy. You know, and for me it's very interesting, and it shows that for them it's really important. And we can look at the history like normal people with the values. Okay, no politics in history. We have to just research. We have to make a right result. We have to make a right like points in this. But what we have to do with so aggressive informational history propaganda from Russia? You know, if we just look at the history like normal scientists, yeah, they make aggressive like a movement, yeah. And of course, we have to do something with it. We can't just look at this like a normal Europeans, yeah. No politics, no. It's just propaganda. No. And I think we have to make some solution in the future. What we have to do with it. It's very important because it's about what people think, you know. And then because, for example, maybe it's bad example, but I don't know. Tomorrow they come to Oslo. And say that Oslo it's Russia, and started to show it use their TV channel from 24 hours, and people in Russia believe that Oslo is a part of Russia. You know, it just look like this one. So we have to do with this. It's a big problem.
You had a comment on the Stiklestad question.
I have, because my name is Caroline
Sekta.
I should have the yeah. Thank you. My name is Caroline Serkansen. I'm an artist, doctor of art history, and also a cultural history person and a writer. And I have followed this history of this chapel, Orthodox chapel at Stiklestad, since it was first blessed in Folldal back in 2003. So it was actually a private initiative from a local Norwegian Orthodox convert group, and they can't be accused of being FSB. But I cannot deny, or it's probably that now Russian Church is interested in this chapel and also of using this story of Saint Olav because he was in Kiev and Rus. So they see the connection between Russia, I mean Kiev and Rus and Norway, historical ties. But I have to say that originally this was enthusiastic Norwegian converts who were not politically motivated by Russian interests, I have to say, because it was really a Norwegian initiative in the beginning. And the chapel was moved to Stiklestad also thanks much to these Norwegian converts. And then it has to say, in 2014, this chapel was velsignet, altså innviet. blessed, yes. I think there's a more exact word for it. But anyway, it was blessed by one of top bishops, metropolitans in the Russian Church, archbishop then of the foreign ministry, so to say, of the Russian Orthodox Church. And so, yes, you can say the Russian Church saw also the potential of this chapel, but it has to say, I have to say, it has a very mixed history here. So we cannot be so black and white and say it's not an initiative from above from the Russian Church. It came from Norwegian people, actually, and it was financed by Norwegian converts also, I have to say. And the Norwegian Stiklestad Historical Center was also very positive of building this chapel in Stiklestad, because they already had a Catholic chapel which was blessed in 1930 for the 900th century celebration of the battle. And then they had, of course, the medieval Stiklestad church. So they wanted also the Orthodox Church to be represented as the third important Christian denomination at Stiklestad, because they all have this tradition of St. Olaf. So that's why. So it's a very much more nuanced history behind it. And I would be happy to tell you. I'll talk with you afterwards. Yes, thank you.
And just a very quick comment on that, because I think also it could be mentioned that Olaf was also celebrated saint in the Orthodox Christianity world in the Middle Ages. So there were churches. What's it called? Initiated in the name of Olav, also in these. So and I think it's an old tradition also to pray to and remember Saint Olaf in the Orthodox world. But yes, you wanted to comment?
Only one sentence more. According to my information, there was on the evening on 23rd February, the evening before the war started, there was in the church there was a meeting, or so that I wasn't there, so I can't say more than I was told.
I was there. You mean in Stiklestad?
Yeah, in the church.
Yes, I was there, so I can tell you what happened.
Good.
Because nothing can talk after.
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely not supporting the attack on Ukraine. I have to say, I'm absolutely supporting you.
Thank you.
But it's,
yeah, in the back there.
I can just ask quickly, because you asked why Russia could be interested. I don't know about this chapel in Stiklestad, but in general you can compare it with Soviet war graves in Norway, which the Russian government is very interested in, because you can say that the strongest religion for the Russian government, it's not the Orthodox Church, it's the Second World War. And it's going like they want to dominate the history, and also like to express Russia, for example, also through like having a choir in this church, for example. So it's a kind of soft power. That's what it is.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Hello, my name is Paulina. Thank you so much for the interesting discussions. Quite some few questions ago, there was some point made about the fact that through Christianity, the lower classes were kind of liberated. And I was wondering whether Ingegerd's personality is perhaps the belief that Christianity makes everyone equal. And I was wondering if that can be tied into the feminist ideology and debate.
That's all? Wow. Well, at least I think we're using Ingegerd in Sigtuna in that debate. I mean, the whole story what we're talking about now, we're talking about how political interest could run the history. And I think it's very important that we have individuals from the history try to build up them. And there is quite a lot of sources we know, so she is important. And of course, she is important in the issue of that men and women are equal. And I think the religion is like politics. It's like an ideology to decide things about people. If you go out behind that, and she was maybe understood two different way of thinking, because she was in a paradigm. So I think you can use her very much for the feministic movement.
Any more questions?
Since everybody wants to talk about something else than Ingegerd, maybe I can also. But something that you touched upon earlier, Gardarike, the Norwegian or Nordic term for Kyiv and Rus, was probably used in the Scandinavian area, as far as I understand. The Kyiv and Rus name is, of course, the original, as far as I understand as well, for those people who lived there in that area. And Rus, there have been different theories about the origin of that word. Some of them say that it comes from the Finnish word for rowers, which is ruotsi. I'm not pronouncing it correct, I'm quite sure about that, but it's written that way for us Norwegians, ruotsi, and that could be the explanation why the people who came and founded this area as a kind of state, or helped founding it as a state, these rowers with boats from the Scandinavian areas, they took this name and gave that to this new founded state then in the 800s or 9th century. Could you comment something more about these different theories about where the name Rus came from?
You start.
I have much more to say about that. Isn't the Finnish Ruotsi the Finnish name on Sweden? Yeah.
I'm sorry. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, and so if this, I think it's a plausible explanation that the name Rus is connected to the Swedish, could we say, colonizers in the area or something. I have no. Maybe you could say something more.
No, but there is a possibility. If you are very, very anti-nationalistic Swedish, you can maybe say that there was never any Sweden, because rusti, or I can't pronounce it either, but Sweden in Finnish is that word you said. So maybe Sigtuna was the western part of the Kyiv Rike. So maybe, I mean, the construction of Sweden is much later. So, and I know that, yeah, that's a theory.
And a quick comment on that, because, of course, the period for the early exploration of the rivers of what became the land of the Rus was in the 700s and 800s, when there was no books written in Scandinavia, nor in what would become Ukraine and Russia. So I think the word Rus, we first find it in Arabic and Greek sources, and there's a very big debate on who these people actually were. That especially the Arabs met on the eastern and northern shores of the Black Sea, who they called Rus, if they were actually Scandinavians or if they were more local people that had connection to Scandinavians. No one really knows. So I think, but this is a very big, I think, and a big discussion, and I think the real experts on this, they don't really agree with each other. It's all on a quite hypothetical level. Yes. Okay, so last comment. Okay.
No, it's a kind of provocative comment in a way, because now we're trying to discuss the different origins of the term Rus. However, the term itself was coined like around the 19th century by some of the historians, and in Ukrainian historiography at least, this is a very artificial construct, what I'm trying to say. And I would like us to think in this direction in a way, because when we speak about what happening 1,000 years ago, there was not a country called Kievan Rus. At least there were different territories and different kingdoms which could be united. So this artificial construct, which we bring into the picture and create a narrative around it, can be in a way quite complicated and quite dangerous, because we start arguing around it who has the ownership to it. And in this case, the war in Ukraine started because of that, and many other things. So let's be a bit careful and try to go deeper and understand how these artificial constructs, for the sake of understanding our common past, really function, because they can create more problems for us than give real answers.
History can be quite dangerous. I think that's a very, very well way to stop this arrangement and to end it on that note. Thank you, everyone, for all the interesting things you had to say, and thank you, everyone, for the very interesting questions you asked. Thank you. Thank you.
On behalf of Ukrainian community in Norway, I would like to give a big applause to this professional panel that almost made the Ingegerd wait, right from Sigtuna. Ted came today just for this event. I'm very thankful. Akim came all the way from Kyiv today to our event to talk to us, so I'm very thankful he made it. And to Gunnar and Tore from Oslo, who also came and made the Ingegerd way to Oslo that she never made. But through this discussion, I also would like to thank the FrittOrd Foundation for this funding for this event, and also for the last event we made about Elizabeth. I would thank you also about that. I think it's very important, the subject we would talk today about the role of women in Middle Ages and how important it is. And to this fact, it's also that we are happy that in Oslo there will be a monument to Elizabeth. So I think with these seminars, and by like you were saying, history is by making, right? When we talk about it, when we discuss it, when we can research more about, and I hope there will be more research done. Like I just wanted to show, and I also send you a file on email. The more I'm researching this topic, the more interesting findings about the Viking findings in Ukraine, all the way from the west, like far away from the rivers, and as far as I am. So this is the kind of the Vikings swords we were talking about today with Ted, about the runestone from Berezan, which is also not very known, but is also in Ukraine. So I'm gathering these facts and artifacts about Vikings in Ukraine, and it's really fascinating. And it's a bit like Akim was saying, it's a detective story to find. So thank you again, all the panel. Thank you, FrittOrd. Thank you, Per Olav, for a beautiful introduction and leading this from Gamlebyen, Historielag. Thank you, Peter Molag from Middelalder Oslo for support and all the information. Thank you, Sofia Kyiv Cathedral, for always being with us. University of Oslo for support. We're also planning to continue with this kind of lectures about Ukraine, because we see it's very interested, and we're planning from September 8 lectures ongoing. So just follow the annonces. It will be about culture and history of Ukraine from September until May 2024. And we have some gifts for you, for the guests of the panels. And it's I invite Kjetil Quist to talk, because one of these gifts is a special coin. And we would like to talk about these coins that our guests will receive just now as the gifts.
Yeah, hello. I try to use my poor English tonight. Thank you for being invited to this. My name is Kjetil Quist. I know some in the audience, but the audience doesn't know me, so I just introduce myself the usual way. And I'm an historian, I'm a coin dealer, I'm a sword swallower. The swords are not here, the coins are here, and it's quite risky to ask me to talk about coins. Last time I talked about this one, it was 45 minutes. It's a coin I have a huge personal involvement in because I designed it. And it was issued by Oslo Numismatic Society for their 50th anniversary. I should add that not only are the gift here, but it's also donated to the National Museum of Ukrainian History and St. Sophia Cathedral in Kyiv. So they also have these in their collections. It's minted in 300 specimens. So on the back there, for those who know it, is Oslo in 1567, but that's not the main thing here. It's the oldest picture of Oslo before we burned it down because we didn't want the Swedes to get it. And the other side, the front side, is of course Elizabeth II, because this coin is minted in Norway, but it's issued by Niue Island, which is a small island in the middle of nowhere that uses New Zealand dollars and sell license to issue coins. So we are the first numismatic society in Norway to issue a coin. And we was quite fast deciding this portrait of Oslo because that had never been done before. But the second side, the first side, was not decided until quite late. And of course we want a numismatic theme, and we wanted coins. So one of the coins is, you can see the two coins. The middle one in the center of the coin is from Harald Harada, Harald the Har ruler. He obviously learned something. He's in Byzantine Empire days. And the symbol is a triquetra symbol. The other coin on the left side, on the right side, is Yaroslav the Wise, one of his most famous coins, not his only coin. He minted two kinds of coins, one srebrenica that was about 3 grams and one penny at about 1 gram. So he paid Vikings in their own currency, pennies. This has a little bit personal history because that wasn't obvious that we should choose a Ukrainian medieval coin on a Norwegian coin. So this was after I had visited Kyiv in last summer, and I discovered a National Bank of Ukraine that issues a lot of coins, made this coin. On the side here, that's a coin for Ellisiv, Queen of Norway and Denmark. And she is the prominent figure on the coin. And on each side, you have Harald Harada as a poet, as a warrior. So this is a tribute to Norway. So I thought when we, in late August, had to decide, we had to give an answer to that coin by introducing Yaroslav's coin on our coins. And digging further into medieval Ukrainian coins, I discovered that the influence of those coins on Norwegian coins are not described in any numismatic literature in Norway during the last 160 years or so. And there are a connection, a very important connection. The triquetra is never really understood, but it does exist on a Ukrainian coin. And the trident is not very much used in Norway, but they have found one of these coins in Norway, which of course make it plausible that they have been used in Norway as payment. And that is, I think, quite interesting. And of course, on the rim of the ship, we placed the name of Ellisiv and Harald, just to make it really clear what the coin was for. So I hope you enjoy it. If anyone else wants a gift for themselves, I have a bunch of coins back there. It's only been 300 specimens of it. That is not enough for all. So just any questions, just contact me.